Jason Corbett was born on February 12, 1976, in Limerick, Ireland. His family was very happy. Parents John and Rita raised 8 children, and Jason had a twin brother named Wayne. Parents did everything possible to ensure that children grew up healthy and did not need anything, but there was never a lot of money. When his father was out of work, Jason did not hesitate to get a part-time job as a security guard at the school sports center. He really wanted to earn extra money and help his loved ones. The right work ethic is what Jason has always tried to follow, and for which his family and friends loved him so much. Among the people who had bright feelings for the guy was Margaret Fitzpatrick, simply Meg. As soon as the young people met, it immediately became clear to everyone that they were made for each other. The couple got married, and in September 2004 they had their first child. The son was named Jack. 2 years later, a daughter, Sarah, was born. True happiness is what Meg and Jason felt while raising their babies. They sincerely loved each other and their children, and everything in their life was fine. The fairy tale ended abruptly. On November 21, 2006, just 3 months after Sarah's birth, a terrible tragedy occurred in the family. That night, Meg woke up with a familiar feeling. She realized that she was having an asthma attack. This has happened before, and then the nebulizer came to the rescue. But this time something went wrong. The medicine did not help, and Jason immediately took his wife to the hospital. Unfortunately, precious time was lost. They did not have time to get there, and a young mother and wife, who was only 31 years old, died. 30-year-old Jason could not find a place for himself from grief. It is impossible to describe in words what he experienced after losing his beloved wife and being left alone with 2 small children. Sister Tracy recalled that on that day, her husband received a call from the hospital and was asked to come urgently. As soon as the couple got to their destination and saw Jason, they immediately realized what had happened. It seemed to the man that he had lost the whole world, but he also knew that his little son and daughter were waiting for him at home, for whom he needed to be strong. That's why Jason didn't let himself get discouraged. He just needed to be close to the children, and this awareness gave him strength and forced him to live on. His relatives supported him as much as possible, trying not to leave Jason alone with his trouble. The modest and kind man felt uncomfortable because his loved ones had to help him so much. He didn't want to be a burden. Of course, no one considered him such, but this thought did not calm Jason down, and in the end he decided to hire an au pair. In 2007, he carried out his plan. The first woman who came to the house to clean and help with the children was a Czech by nationality. The young father could not find a common language with her and was forced to refuse the services offered. Then he hired a Spanish woman, but she didn't speak English, and this caused a lot of trouble for Jason. In addition, both women were only looking for a temporary part-time job, not wanting to stay in Ireland forever, and Jason needed an assistant who would be with him for many years. He wanted the one who would take part in the life of his children, not to run away suddenly, but to become a reliable support in the family. After thinking about it, the man decided that the best solution would be to hire a nanny who speaks English and needs a long-term job. In early February 2008, Jason received an email from 20-year-old Molly Martens. She sent a resume, the information in which, as it turned out later, did not correspond to reality. First, the young woman claimed to have graduated from Clemson University, although in fact she dropped out. She also wrote that she had passed the test and received permission to become a foster parent, which was also not true. Molly was the type of person who couldn't live without constant lying and who was often caught lying. However, Jason had no idea about anything. On the contrary, it seemed to him that he had finally found what he needed. The future au pair agreed to move to Ireland and take care of Sarah and Jack. She lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and flew to Ireland on March 10, 2008. Everything initially went wrong according to plan. When Molly went through customs, she was actually denied entry because she bought a one-way ticket only. Problems with the migration service arose because Molly did not know how long she would stay in a foreign country, and she did not have a special work visa. In the end, she managed to settle the issue and get permission to enter. Jason asked his good friend to meet Molly. Later, this acquaintance said that when she first saw the future nanny, she realized that this was not what Jason needed. Molly was young, beautiful, and dressed like she was running for Miss America. But Sarah and Jack got used to it pretty quickly, and it seemed like everything was going fine. The nanny took care of the children, and Jason was calm. After a while, the relationship between Jason and Molly became closer. The man began to invite the babysitter on dates. But first, we need to tell you about Kit, Molly's American boyfriend. They dated for several years before Molly decided to go to work in Ireland. Keith later insisted that they hadn't even broken up before. He also stated that Molly had mental health problems, and on the eve of her acquaintance with Jason, she was discharged from a psychiatric hospital. According to Keith, the young woman was not suitable to go to another country and raise children who had lost their mother. Molly told Keith that she wasn't going to stay there for a long time, and it was strange because she told Jason something completely different and assured him that she wanted to get a job as an au pair for a long time. After living in Ireland for 2 weeks, Molly contacted Keith and informed him that she would not come back. Apparently, in those days, Molly made a firm decision to cut Keith out of her life, which hurt the guy to the core. But let's watch the development of the relationship between Jason and the nanny he hired. Dating someone who lives under the same roof with you, but whom you still know very little, is somewhat strange and problematic. Jason himself understood that the situation was not ideal, but he was comforted by the fact that Molly got along well with the children and everything was going well. The kids got attached to the babysitter. From the outside, it looked very nice and did not cause any fears. Relations between the young were developing rapidly, and yet their candy bouquet period did not last long, as evidenced by the couple's electronic correspondence. A few months after Molly arrived in Ireland, Jason asked her to come home for a while and be with her relatives. He wrote to her about this in an email. Jason admitted that he did not want their relationship to develop so quickly. It had only been 2 years since Meg died, and he wasn't sure he wanted to get married again. This answer, of course, upset Molly, and she wrote Jason some unpleasant words. In the end, it was decided that they would continue dating, but only Jason would be more comfortable if Molly moved to another apartment when she returned to Ireland and got another job. Molly agreed, but in the end it never happened. She did not move out, but still lived in her lover's house. One day she made it clear that she no longer wanted to be where Meg once lived. Further, more. Molly said she felt like a shadow of a dead woman. After much persuasion, Jason agreed and sold the house on the 3rd anniversary of Meg's death. And in 2010, on Valentine's Day, he proposed to Molly. Jason really loved her, and most importantly, he was sure that the children also loved the caring Molly very much. The couple got engaged. Their carefree life shone with new colors. After a while, Molly said that she missed her homeland and did not want to stay in Ireland anymore and suggested that the household move to America. Jason understood that the kids would hardly bear parting with Molly, which means they should all go together. In addition, it was not difficult for Jason to move his work abroad. So the family moved to North Carolina, where they bought a beautiful house with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. The wedding took place on June 4th, 2011 in Tennessee, where Molly was from. The young woman's father, Tom Martens, led his daughter down the aisle, and little Jack and Sarah acted as bearers of rings and flowers. If you look at the photos, this day seems incredibly happy, but there are a few points that are worth paying attention to. Molly told her friends that she and Meg were friends before she died of cancer. This is, of course, a lie, because Meg died in 2006, and until that time, Molly was not familiar with Jason and could not communicate with his wife. In addition, the cause of death of the latter was asthma, not cancer. This behavior of Molly, who was spreading lies, seems strange. Several years have passed since then. The family continued to live in North Carolina. The kids called Molly Mom. She got a part-time job as a swimming instructor and spent most of her free time at home with her children. During these years, Jason worked as a manager at a packaging plant from morning to evening. The couple made many new friends. People liked Jason very much. People were attracted by his kindness and friendliness. The man was often seen on the street, sipping beer, walking with the guys, or chatting with neighbors. It seemed that there were no problems in his life, but there were actually disagreements in the relationship of the spouses. One of the biggest problems was that Molly wanted to adopt children, but Jason didn't like the idea. He refused his wife's request, and not even out of anger, but most likely because he doubted the strength of his relationship with Molly. Days went by, and gradually, Jason began to think seriously about the issue of divorce and returning with his son and daughter to Ireland. The fact that their relationship is really no good, Jason directly told his wife. He even hid the children's passports, fearing that Molly would get rid of them. It is worth noting that Jason still could not be called an ideal person, much less an ideal husband. This can be said with confidence after listening to a recording made by Molly on the advice of a lawyer during one of the quarrels. Shortly before the quarrel, Molly consulted with a lawyer on the question of what her parental rights would be if Jason ever divorced her, because technically she is not the mother of the children. The recorded conversation was supposed to prove that Jason was a bad father or used violence. That's when Molly could count on custody of Sarah and Jack. She placed recording devices all over the house to try to catch her husband in one of his fits of anger. As a result, audio files appeared that exposed the father of 2 children in an unsightly light for him. Once during dinner, Molly provoked Jason, made him flare up, and she repeated in a tearful voice that her husband ignored her, did not want to hear. It turned out to be a scandal out of the blue, and the quarrel was recorded on the device in the presence of children. It turned out that Jason was a violent family man, but Molly never told anyone about it and certainly never reported it to the police. And since victims of domestic violence are often silent, this behavior of the young wife was not surprising. There is still a lot we don't know, and there is still an active debate about whether Molly's statement is true. Molly's family portrayed Jason as a terrible and domineering man, while his relatives repeated the opposite, assuring that Molly invented this lie to justify her act. So we turn to what happened at night on the first day of August 2015, or rather at dawn, when the morning of August 2nd was already coming. That evening, Molly's parents, Tom and Sharon, came to North Carolina to visit the family. The exact purpose of the visit is still unclear. Some people think that Molly and her father planned this visit in advance so that Dad would be there. Others do not see anything special in the usual parental visit, which turned into something terrible. Since Tom and Sharon arrived late in the evening, they decided to give the gifts prepared for the children in the morning. And this is a very important point. They had prepared a baseball bat for Jack, and they were going to give Sarah a tennis racket. When dinner was over, Tom and Sharon went to the guest bedroom in the basement. Molly and Jason went to the marital bedroom on the first floor, and the children went up to the second floor and went to their rooms. According to Molly, Sarah woke her up at 3 a.m. The girl had a bad dream and she ran to her mother. Molly took Sarah back to her room, put her to bed, but by the time she got back, Jason was also awake and incredibly angry, obviously because he was roused in the middle of the night. His anger caused the fight. Molly later claimed that it was the fight that led to her husband's death. Shortly after the alleged fight began, Tom, who previously served as an FBI agent, allegedly heard some sounds coming from the bedroom of his daughter and son-in-law. The noise seemed strange to him, and he took the bat that he was going to give Jack, went into the room. The moment Tom opened the door, he saw Jason holding Molly by the neck. When Jason saw his wife's father, he squeezed her throat with a chokehold and dragged her into the bathroom, hissing at the same time that he was going to kill her. The father began to beg the man to let Molly go, but when he realized that his requests were in vain, he decided to rush at Jason with a bat. According to Tom's statement, which he made later, the first blow did not bring the expected result. The son-in-law continued to strangle Molly. Tom had to keep hitting and hitting. At some point, Jason unclenched his hands and let go of his victim to grab the bat and try to pull it out. The men started fighting, and it turned out that Jason pushed Tom. He ended up on the floor face down, and the son-in-law took possession of the bat. The father said that at that moment, Molly frantically screamed at Jason not to touch her dad. She was seriously afraid that her husband might beat him to death. Picking up a brick that was lying on her bedside table, Molly ran up to the fighting. At this time, the bat was again in Tom's hands and he began to strike. Molly helped her father armed with a brick, so they took turns beating the man until they realized that he was no longer dangerous. Calling the police, Tom described the events. It seemed as if his son-in-law had quarreled with his wife, his father intervened in the conflict, and now his son-in-law urgently needs help. Maybe Tom even killed him. When an ambulance arrived at the scene, it became clear that what happened here at night speaks of much more violent events than simple self-defense. The first person who approached Jason realized this when he lifted his head. His fingers went right through the skull and touched the brain matter. The injuries were very serious. Tom and Molly said that they beat Jason for a very long time, wanting to make sure that he did not pose a threat. But the skull of the deceased was fractured from behind, which means Jason could not face them. As for the scene of the incident, the walls and floor of the bedroom were literally covered with blood. The photographs give reason to call the attack extremely brutal. It is important to note the following fact. Some of the first responders found that the blood on the brick and on Jason's body had already started to dry out, and the man himself was cold to the touch. This suggests that not so little time has passed since the death. Fortunately, the children were asleep all this time and did not hear the noise. The police took them from the house, which was in turmoil. Molly was taken to a patrol car where she waited for about an hour before she could be examined by paramedics. One of the officers said that when they approached her, Molly was crying loudly, but there were no tears visible. Molly also rubbed her neck every now and then, explaining that it hurt her, because Jason tried to strangle her. However, apart from one tiny red mark on her throat, Molly didn't have any other injuries, and neither did Tom, although he claimed that he and Jason fought fiercely for the bat. The father and daughter were taken to the police station to give official testimony and photographed several times. In her story, Molly claimed that she and her father killed Jason solely in self-defense because her husband attacked her. She said he had drunk a lot that day and was very angry when he was woken up at night. Molly couldn't remember anything definite about what had happened after the first brick blow she had struck, but she stubbornly insisted that all her and Dad's actions were aimed at self-defense. Molly claimed that for many years she had been abused by her husband, but kept silent because she was afraid of losing custody of the children. During the investigation, the police found no evidence that Molly was physically abused during her life together with Jason. Judging by the audio recordings made by Molly, Jason really was hot-tempered, but it can hardly be said that he showed cruelty towards his wife. Tom's testimony coincided with that of his daughter. He also mentioned his son-in-law's drunkenness that night. Tom also said that Jason's first wife died under mysterious circumstances, which is absolutely untrue and sounds disgusting. Meg died of an asthma attack. It was confirmed by doctors. Tracy, Jason's sister, confirmed that her brother was going to divorce Molly and return to Ireland with the children, and that Molly knew about it. Couldn't that have been the motive behind the subsequent events? When Tracy found out about her brother's death, she immediately flew to the United States and met with detectives. She shared with them her opinion that Molly was probably not entirely truthful in her story, and the detectives agreed with this. As it turned out, they were already planning to conduct a full investigation. A day after Jason's death, an autopsy was performed on the body. Experts have established that the man died from a blunt force head injury. Jason had multiple lacerations, abrasions, and bruises of the head, extensive fractures of the skull, and much more. The injuries were so severe that the medical examiner could not determine with certainty how many times the man was hit, but it was obvious that he received at least 12 blows. This terrible message was replaced by the conclusion of toxicologists, which also turned out to be shocking. Molly claimed that Jason had been drinking all day, but according to research, the alcohol content in his blood was a tiny fraction. An adult man weighing more than 110 kilograms could not have been drunk when he allegedly attacked his wife. But what is really strange is that traces of antidepressants were found in his body. It turned out that this drug was prescribed to Molly a few days before Jason's death, and just a few days ago, Jason told his doctor that he felt a sudden anger for which there was no reason. Although this is not confirmed, but the relatives of the deceased believe that Molly slipped him her medications. Probably many people are wondering what happened to Jack and Sarah during this time. Both children temporarily stayed with Molly's brother, but on August 3rd, when the autopsy was being conducted, each of them was brought in for a conversation with a social worker. There were hopes that the children would shed some light on this incomprehensible marriage. And so it turned out, Jack and Sarah said that Dad was angry all the time and even hurt Mom. Since Molly's accusations were confirmed, the task of the investigators became much more complicated. Now they had two witnesses who claimed to have witnessed Molly's abuse. The version of Jason's attack on his wife has become much more likely. There is one more important thing that became known from communication with Jack. We are talking about the ill-fated brick lying on Molly's bedside table. Any sane person would think that a brick could not accidentally end up in the bedroom next to the bed. Detectives were also alerted, but Molly made a statement, which was later confirmed by Jack, that she and the children planned to paint this brick and put it outside the house. Obviously, the family wanted to realize a funny artistic idea, and Molly brought a brick into the house because it started raining. But you must agree that in this case, she could have brought him into the hallway, left him at the door or somewhere else, while he turned out to be in the marital bedroom and on the table in front of the bed. Soon, Molly filed documents for custody and guardianship of Jack and Sarah. But in the end, the children were still handed over to Tracy and her husband, as indicated by Jason in his will. One thing is for sure. Tensions between Molly, her family, and Jason's loved ones were running high. Molly did not even allow the relatives of the deceased spouse to come to the memorial service and hired security in case one of them tried to appear. There was also some controversy over the burial of Jason's body. Molly insisted that he be cremated as soon as possible, while her sister wanted to transport her brother's body to Ireland and bury it there. In the end, the widow agreed to this, but on the condition that her sister would bear all the costs associated with the funeral. Tracy did just that. Thus, Jason's body returned to his homeland. At first, Jason's family was very worried that Tom and Molly would not be brought to justice, but they were arrested on December 18, 2015. A grand jury indicted the father and daughter on charges of second-degree murder and negligent manslaughter. Of course, none of them admitted guilt. The joint trial was scheduled for July 17, 2017. Before that, Molly gave an interview to the TV channel, where she confirmed her words about Jason's abuse and that she was innocent of his death. However, by this time, Jack and Sarah, who had grown up, had retracted their initial statements. They said that their father was not a violent man and that they were forced to lie. The situation has become complicated again. Both sides presented forensic evidence in court, including photographs from the crime scene, testimony from first responders, officers, as well as medical research data. To prove that Jason Corbett was brutally murdered, the prosecution called a bloodstain analysis specialist to testify, who stated that the trajectory of the blood splashes did not correspond to self-defense. The attack started with Tom and Molly hitting Jason when he got up. The expert claimed that Jason was defenseless and lying face down, and he was repeatedly attacked. The defense tried its best to refute the expert's testimony, but these attempts were unsuccessful. The prosecution pointed to the existence of Jason's life insurance policy for $600,000 and the fact that he did not allow Molly to officially adopt children. This was a strong motive for the crime. Defense representatives described Jason as a terrible man, an abusive husband, and reminded that Molly wanted to officially adopt children. They also referred to Tom's testimony in the hope that the jury would see an honest man in the former FBI agent. Molly herself did not speak in her own defense, which was probably a reasonable step on her part. The trial lasted until August 9, 2017, and then, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict, and each of the defendants was sentenced to 20 and 25 years in prison. A week later, Tom and Molly filed an appeal, claiming that the jury's behavior was unlawful. Just a few minutes after the end of the trial, one of the jurors was talking to a representative of the press, and this is unacceptable. Other claims were also voiced. On December 1, 2017, the defendant's appeal was rejected, but then they appealed to the Supreme Court of North Carolina, and in early 2021 they achieved their goal. Tom Martens and Molly Corbett were released on $200,000 bail and left the Davidson County Jail just 1 hour apart. After their release, a reasonable question arose about the possibility of concluding a deal. However, the father and daughter still adhere to their statements and consider themselves innocent. The retrial of their case was supposed to take place in June 2023, but it was postponed to November 6th. Obviously, this is going to be a pretty high-profile trial. I want to tell you about how things are with Jack and Sarah. They were only 10 and 8 years old when their father died, and now they are already adult young people. Aunt Tracy and Uncle David adopted the boys and moved them to Ireland. Sarah, with the help of Aunt Tracy, has written and published a series of children's books designed to help children cope with loneliness after the bereavement of a loved one. Jack became a singer, songwriter, and an accomplished rugby player. Both of them, both brother and sister, do not stop fighting for justice in the case of their dad, and will certainly act as key witnesses for the prosecution at the upcoming trial.